Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update here on social media. Thank you as always for joining us. A lot to talk about, mostly the current crisis caused by the scheme by New York Democrat politicians to try to jail and make Trump a political prisoner. Obviously, I'll be talking about that. Major new victory for election integrity out in Colorado, plus a new lawsuit to vindicate a victim of deadly illegal alien crime out in the sanctuary city of Chicago. The big news is the unprecedented, reckless, damaging, dangerous, outrageous, you name it, indictment of President Trump by Alvin Bragg, based on really a novel, to put it charitably, application of the law, unprecedented application of the law to target President Trump and obviously, in my view, to interfere in the 2024 elections. And this is my initial reaction. I'm going to read it to you because it's important that we get it on the record, and I'll explain further some of the corruption involved here. Trump is a crime victim. New York Democrats' reckless scheme to prosecute and jail President Trump is a dangerous attack on the rule of law and a brazen attempt to rig the 2024 elections for President Biden and the Democrats. Judicial Watch denounces Alvin Bragg's corrupt attempt to make President Trump into a political prisoner. Congress and every responsible government official should try to do everything possible under the law to undo this attempt to wreck our Republican form of government. So this is a dangerous move by Bragg in terms of attacking the rule of law. It's an obvious abuse of power. He is a left-wing Democrat in a left-leaning jurisdiction. Obviously, New York is about as Democrat and left-leaning as you can get in terms of the American population. And so the goal is to jail Trump and interfere with the election. I don't know how else to describe it to you. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about whether the charges are valid or not. Let me put it this way. Trump is innocent. Bragg knows he's innocent, and he's abusing his power and abusing the grand jury process to try to destroy him. These are charges that have been rejected and considered by other law enforcement, federal law enforcement, been rejected and considered by his own office. And he decided to resurrect them after Trump announced his run for the presidency. So let's be blunt. There's no good faith basis for these charges against Trump. And the danger to our republic comes from this embrace by the Democratic Party, and it's not just in New York. It's here in Washington, D.C. under the Biden administration. It's in Fulton County, Georgia, where they're trying to abuse Trump and target him for daring to dispute the elections in 2020, as the law allows. And it's this embrace by the Democratic Party and the left of using prosecutorial powers of the government at the federal and state level to jail their political opponents. And in this case, the former president of the United States. It makes a mockery of our justice system. It makes a mockery of our standing among the world. Obviously, America isn't perfect, but it has this reputation, well-deserved, for not jailing people based on politics. Now, not to say it doesn't happen time and again, but the idea that America would start jailing leading political officials for purely political reasons, it's something that's never happened again. And I don't know how it's going to change us. Is it going to ruin the country? Is it going to ruin the republic? Is it going to lead to grand juries in Mississippi or Texas or Florida indicting Biden and Schumer and Pelosi? I don't know. But now we're no better, at least in New York, than Putin's Moscow or Xi's Beijing or Fidel Castro's, I guess he's not around anymore, Castro's Havana. I mean, Cuba, China, Russia, and the United States. Why would we want to be among that crowd in how we target politically people for prosecution? This is a dire threat to the rule of law. It's designed to, as I said in the statement, interfere in our elections. No one's fooled. No one's fooled that this is a legitimate prosecution. And you can see how things are shaking out. You have Democrats pretending it is, embracing this anti-American attack on the rule of law. You even have some Republicans who are frankly too silent on it because they don't like Trump, further highlighting the political nature of it. Look, you had Nancy Pelosi say that, well, Trump can prove his innocence in court. I mean, that just confirms just how political this process is, because you don't, quote, prove your innocence in court. You're presumed to be innocent. But when it comes to Trump and the left-wing Democrats, you're presumed to be guilty. And it's just a matter of finding the right crime to fit. So I don't know what's going to happen. You know, is Trump going to go to jail? Is he going to be denied bail? Who knows? If he's convicted, will he serve time in jail? Will he run for president from jail? And of course, this isn't the only risk he faces to his liberty from these authoritarian-minded politicians who are trying to jail their political opposition. So Judicial Watch is already on the case. We've begun FOIAs. For instance, we FOIA'd the Federal Election Commission. And you know what? We got a response back saying they didn't have any communications with Bragg. Isn't that interesting? Because Bragg is supposedly very interested in whether these false statements allegedly about the payments to Daniels had campaign finance violations attached to them or involved campaign finance violations either at the federal or state level, but no communications with the Federal Elections Commission. So we confirm that. Judicial Watch is already moving forward on these issues. So I don't know about you, but I just don't think this is a normal corruption scandal. This is a kind of an attack on the way we're supposed to govern ourselves. I mean, do you want local prosecutors to pick who's going to be the president and decide whether they can jail and just make it up as they go along in terms of figuring out crimes to try to jail the political opponent of their allied president? As best I can tell, Biden hasn't said anything. And to me, silence means complicity here. Silence means endorsement. Certainly his Justice Department is engaged in the same type of abusive investigations that Bragg has been in. And same goes for Fulton County, Georgia. So this could be just the beginning of the targeting against Trump and the abusive prosecutions. And I don't know what the country's going to do about it. And I just hope that cooler heads prevail and that Bragg somehow crosses back, right? You know, he's crossed the Rubicon in terms of this unprecedented, vicious indictment of Trump. Maybe he can go back the other way, back across the Rubicon and stop attacking the Republic. You know, Bragg is already beginning or exposing how lawless his approach is. He's refusing to cooperate with congressional investigations into his obvious abuse of power. Obviously, Congress has an interest in ensuring government money, or at least federal money, isn't being misused to try to make the former president of the United States a political prisoner. Obviously, it's a federal question, and to suggest that there's no business of Congress to ask questions in this regard shows that Bragg thinks he may be above the law. So, you know, this has got to be a priority for Congress, in my view. And what can Congress do? I tell you what, my thinking is if New York State is going to abuse its powers to try to jail a federal candidate and a president on a pretext and make them a political prisoner, the least Congress can do is to ensure that federal funds aren't involved in that abuse. So they should be taking immediate steps to evaluate where and how they can start restricting federal funds flowing to New York State. You know, New York has, I guess, certain sovereign rights under law, within law, to try to prosecute Trump. You know, I think it's abusive, and they know it's abusive. but there's only so much that can be done to police that. And one of the ways that can be policed is through the restrictions of federal funding. And if Congress can't manage to figure that out, again, what is it there for? And that ought to be a priority. And the governor of New York, again, can intervene and stop this abuse. You should contact Governor Hochul. We'll put her phone number up, or at least below. You can Google, figure it out yourself as well. But there's got to be accountability here. And, we just can't just sit by and say, well, it's going to happen, nothing we can do. We should think about what we can do under law, as I said earlier, and pressure government officials to do what they can under law to protect Trump from this violation of his civil rights. They're trying to take away his freedom because of his politics. And that's not the American way. So Judicial Watch will do all the heavy lifting we can do to expose and hopefully stop this corruption. But we'll also be educating you about what you can do to help that along. Obviously, you can do it directly by supporting Judicial Watch, but also, as I suggested, communicating with the responsible government officials, both in Congress, whose phone number we'll put below, and the governor of New York and other elected officials in New York. There's got to be First Amendment activity to defend the rule of law in the least, because our republic is at stake. Our republic is at stake. Well, at least I have some good news now. As you may know or should know, that Judicial Watch is America's leading group in trying to ensure that elections are run with integrity, that cheating is minimized, and where the rules are followed. And one of the key ways we do that is to sue in federal court states and localities that refuse to follow federal law that require them to take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. And we've had remarkable success in either winning outright or getting agreements through settlements or other actions by the states to clean up the rolls. And in California, I just told you a few weeks ago how they reported to us as under a federal lawsuit settlement to clean up their rolls that LA County cleaned up 1.2 million names from their rolls, just in LA County alone, thanks to the terms of a Judicial Watch settlement. In North Carolina, about 430,000 names were cleaned up after we sued. In New York, about 450, I think it's even more than that, have been cleaned up because of a Judicial Watch lawsuit or our efforts to alert them that the rolls in New York City were filthy. And so just in those three jurisdictions, there's 2 million names we've cleaned up over the last year, thanks to our litigation and pressure. And we also have pending lawsuits in Pennsylvania and Colorado. And we just announced this week, and it was filed with the court, a settlement with Colorado in which they've agreed to report to us over 6 years what they're doing to clean up the rolls. And it's no coincidence, after we filed our lawsuit, and we note in the release describing it, that Colorado, over a key period, increased by 78% the number of voters they removed from the rolls. It was, at least according to numbers I'm seeing here, it went from 172 and changed to about 306,000 names they removed. I think that's what, over 130,000 name difference. So that's an extra 130,000 names they removed after Judicial Watch's lawsuit was filed. We filed the lawsuit way back in October 2020 out in Colorado on behalf of Judicial Watch and 3 residents of Colorado, alleging that the state had failed to clean its voting rolls as required by the National Voter Registration Act. So that's the law you have to remember when you're thinking about what your state is doing or what your locality is doing. What are they doing under the National Voter Registration Act to clean up voter rolls? The lawsuit alleged that high registration rates and other voter roll metrics indicate an ongoing systemic problem with Colorado's voter list maintenance efforts. Judicial Watch sought a court order declaring that Colorado and its Secretary of State violated the law and ordering them to develop and implement a general program that makes a reasonable effort to remove the registrations of ineligible registrants from the voter rolls in Colorado. And again, I would encourage you to kind of listen to that again or go and look at it. We'll have a link below. That's what every state should be doing. They're all supposed to be doing that. And what Judicial Watch does is we look at the numbers, and if their numbers aren't seemingly indicating that they are doing this, we go and warn them, and if they still aren't cleaning up the rolls or show us what they're doing, we sue them. The number of outdated registrations removed by Colorado under this key provision increased after we filed suit, as I said, from about 172,000 to 306,000 registrations for the period ending in 2022. The settlement agreement requires Colorado to provide Judicial Watch its most recent voter roll data for each Colorado county each year for 6 years. The data is to include the total number of registered and eligible voters, active voters, and inactive voters. And inactive voters is a bureaucratic way of saying the voter hasn't voted in a while and they're, quote, inactive, and supposedly they're subject potentially to removal. But they're still registered, practically speaking. So anyone can vote is an inactive, just because you're inactive doesn't mean you can't vote. And in terms of the voter fraud potential, it's kind of a pool of names that fraudsters potentially can use to vote in someone else's name. For instance, if someone has moved away, hasn't been around for years, and they're still on the registration list, why would we want that to be? Obviously, it's an opportunity for fraud. The total number of, and this is additional information, of address confirmation notices sent to Colorado voters pursuant to the National Voter Registration Act. The number of received back confirming or changing an address, and the number that were undeliverable or not returned. And then the number of registration addresses removed pursuant to key provisions of the Act. So what we're demanding and asking is this process be certified more or less under this settlement agreement, and they've agreed to it. And this process is the process that results in these names being cleaned up. And so what happens is, the way I understand it's supposed to work in practice, is that if you don't vote in a federal election, you're supposed to get a notice, a card from your registrar saying, hey, you haven't voted, are you still there? Can you confirm you're at this address? And if you don't respond or otherwise don't vote in the next 2 federal elections, so that we're talking maybe as long as 5 years, they're supposed to remove your name. So we had indications that wasn't going on in Colorado. Maybe they were sending some of the stuff out, but they weren't receiving or removing names when they should have. There are all sorts of arguments we were having back and forth with Colorado. And in the end, we settled that. They said that we're going to be able to track the numbers in a more direct way. And of course, once we sued, they took a bunch of names off, which was really the ultimate purpose of our lawsuit, don't you think? Is just to make sure they're cleaning up the rolls. And then they have a process in place that we're going to be confirming through the settlement that they will clean up as things proceed, which is a typical part of a settlement agreement in a situation like this. Now, by the way, the Colorado Secretary of State is an ardent leftist who hates Judicial Watch. She said our effort here was, fighting democracy was anti-democratic. I mean, how is it cleaning up voter rolls anti-democratic? She's using these left-wing talking points. They don't even make any sense in the context. And if we were going to war against democracy, why is she settling this federal lawsuit with us? It's because there's something I think we fairly were bringing to the table, and they wanted to settle with us. Now, we didn't, it's a settlement, right? So both sides give something up when you settle. So we're satisfied with the settlement. She, rather than just saying she's satisfied with the settlement, decides to attack Judicial Watch, which I think tells you that we were probably right to begin asking questions in the first place, don't you think? So coming on the heels of a massive voter roll cleanup in Colorado, thanks to our lawsuit, this settlement agreement is a major victory for all Colorado voters, and I would submit all voters across the country, because when the voter lists are clean in any particular state, or cleaner than they otherwise would be. That means that the elections there are more honest. And at the federal level, elections have consequences, obviously, by state, obviously at the presidential level, most obviously, but at the congressional level and the Senate level, you want the federal election rolls to be as clean as possible. Simply put, cleaner voter rolls mean cleaner elections. And the inverse of that is dirty voting rolls can mean dirty elections. And that's what we oppose. So Judicial Watch is the national leader in voting integrity and voting rights. As part of its work, we've assembled a team, a crack team of highly experienced voting rights attorneys who stop discriminatory elections in Hawaii and clean up voter rolls in California, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and other achievements. And that Hawaii case, that's something, I mean, I have to go back over that one day with you. I don't have time to do it tonight, but that case is where the leftists in Hawaii wanted to have a race-based election process and didn't want people of a certain race to vote in elections to try to push an effort to have Hawaii secede from the United States. Of course, that was endorsed by the Obama administration, but we won. We had the Supreme Court stop that election. As I said earlier, in February, Los Angeles County confirmed removal of 1.2 million ineligible voters from its rolls. Since last year, under the terms of a settlement agreement they agreed to back in 2017. So I said it's a process, right? They said we're going to follow these rules, and this is what it led to: 1.2 million names being removed from the rolls, just simply by doing this basic list maintenance. And it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but at least you're ensuring there's a process in place that we're going to try to make them cleaner. We settled a case in New York City, as I said, 441,000 names removed after we had sued and warned them. And of course, they promised also to take reasonable steps, like Colorado did, going forward to clean its voter registration rolls. So that, we're not just going to walk away, we're going to monitor what happens and go back if there's an issue. Kentucky, I think the numbers are in the hundreds of thousands as well. We had a consent decree there. So they agreed to clean up the rolls. And Kentucky is a Republican-oriented state. I talked about North Carolina, and that was another big voter roll cleanup where they removed over 430,000 registrations from its voter rolls after we sued. And of course, there's other litigation. In Maryland, we beat back a Democratic legislator attempt to rig elections in favor of Democrats in Congress through improper political gerrymandering. We have an ongoing case in Illinois over their counting ballots that arrive up to 2 weeks, mail-in ballots that arrive up to 2 weeks after the election, including ballots that aren't postmarked. It's at odds with federal law. So this is just great stuff. Our lead lawyer is Bob Popper. He's our lead lawyer on the election issues. He was previously a Justice Department attorney. So not all things that happen in the Justice Department are terrible. Bob worked in the Justice Department. He was at the voting section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. So, Bob knows what he's talking about. And this is why when Judicial Watch goes to court, we have Russ Nobel, who also worked at the Justice Department, and some other great lawyers involved as well. These states have to pay attention to us. So, who would have thought that Los Angeles County in California would have settled with Judicial Watch? Who would have thought that New York City, the very far left jurisdiction, would settle with Judicial Watch? Colorado, the Secretary of State evidently can't stand us, but she still settled with Judicial Watch. And that's frankly to their credit. She's calling us names. I think it's good they settled. That's what a responsible public official does. We're bringing this forward not to destroy people, but just to try to get the law enforced so elections are cleaner. And so good for New York and California and Colorado for settling with Judicial Watch, of course, after we filed the federal lawsuit, to be clear. So it's not completely voluntary. But kudos to them, and obviously kudos to Judicial Watch, because it would never have been done otherwise. By the way, this law can be enforced, this cleanup law, by the federal government, by the Justice Department. It refuses to do that. And so it's up to Judicial Watch, because the Justice Department is run by leftists. They don't want clean voter rolls, ideologically, and they have zero interest in having the Justice Department enforce this area of the law. So it was up to Judicial Watch to come in and sue in federal court on behalf of voters and the American people, and of course you, Judicial Watch supporters, and we're winning. And we're making gains for election integrity and fairer and cleaner elections. It's just great, great news out of Colorado, and more is coming. We're expecting a new set of numbers about voter registration numbers later in the year, and you can bet if the numbers are bad again in any particular state, we will go and figure out what's going on, demand changes, and if the changes aren't made, we will sue again to clean up the rolls. Which is, you know, I don't need to tell you, or maybe I should remind you, it's especially important since we're doing this, what I believe to be reckless, massive mail-in balloting and voting all over the nation. The least we can do is ensure that the voting rolls are clean, so we're not sending ballots to people we know, or should know aren't there. And it's a lot easier and a lot less risky in terms of fraud just to try to vote in someone's name through the mail. So we got to ensure at least the names that are being registered and acted upon are legit in terms of being eligible to vote. So thank God, once again, that Judicial Watch is doing this core work, because it would not be done otherwise. And our elections would be even worse off than you may think they are now. Well, this is a case that I think is going to upset you, rightly. It's about a man who was killed by an illegal alien drunk driver. The drunk driver was arrested and then released by Chicago, Cook County specifically, that has a sanctuary policy. They didn't tell the feds about him. And he fled to Mexico. And after 10 years, he was finally extradited. And now the Biden administration is hiding the extradition records from us. So that's the summary of the case, and here are the details. We filed a new lawsuit against the Justice Department and the Biden State Department for extradition records of an illegal alien. His name is Saul Chavez, who ran over and killed William Denny McCann, the brother of our client, Brian McCann. The lawsuit was filed after both agencies, refused to turn over Chavez's extradition records. And this is the background. In June 2011, Chavez ran over and killed Denny McCann, brother of Judicial Watch client Brian McCann, as I said. At the time, Chavez was unlawfully present. He was an illegal alien. He was an unlawfully present criminal alien and had just completed a 2-year term of probation under a 2009 DUI conviction. So he crosses the border illegally, or he's here illegally, and he commits another crime, and he's still here. He was charged with felony aggravated driving under the influence, but was released by the Cook County Sheriff's Office in November 2011, despite a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement detainer. And as I said earlier, Chavez then fled to Mexico. He was finally extradited from Mexico back in December of 2022. Now, we filed a FOIA request to the State Department for Chavez's extradition records, and also the Justice Department. The State Department has failed completely to respond, let alone produce any records. The Justice Department denied the request outright, citing, among other reasons, the privacy interests of the criminal Chavez. So this is just, can you imagine being Denny's brother and his family and getting the runaround from the feds about this desperate effort to get justice for your brother who was killed? In July 2015, our client Brian testified before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee in a hearing titled Oversight of the Administration's Misdirected Immigration Enforcement Policies, examining the impact on public safety and honoring the victims. So this was during the Obama administration. And this is the story, and it's going to be very upsetting. Denny was crossing Kedzie Avenue on a marked crosswalk 4 years ago and was violently struck by a drunk driver who dragged Denny under his car for a block in an attempt to flee before Denny died. The family was notified by the Chicago police, and the killer was placed into custody and charged, as I said earlier, with aggravated DUI, causing death. 2 days later, ICE issued a detainer because the young man was an illegal alien with a prior felony. The family was assured by the Cook County prosecutor that the defendant would not be allowed to post bail and be released. But 3 months later, the Cook County Board passed the ordinance that effectively requires the sheriff to ignore detainers. During the intervening weeks after Denny's violent death, Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle and former mayoral candidate and Commissioner Jesus Garcia pushed for the ordinance and rammed it through on September 17th, 2011. So all this is around the time his brother was killed. 2 months later, the killer made bail and absconded to Mexico. I mean, can you imagine? They had him and they let him go. And he did what any sensible person would know would happen, which is he went back to Mexico. This is what Brian said about this latest lawsuit to get records about this 10-year plus extradition process. My family and I continue to seek justice for Denny. Now that he has been extradited from Mexico, we are one step closer, but we still want to know what took so long. With the help of Judicial Watch, we hope to find out. I tell you, that's what makes it easy to come to work for Judicial Watch, knowing you're helping people get information like Brian's trying to get with our help. And as I noted, Denny McCann was killed by an illegal alien with a prior felony, and that criminal was released and fled to Mexico as a result of Chicago's lawless and deadly sanctuary policies. And to make matters worse, the Biden administration is unlawfully hiding records about why it took over a decade to extradite from Mexico this murderous criminal. So we're in federal court. You know, previously we had sued as part of our effort to obtain justice for Denny. We filed a lawsuit on behalf of Brian, his brother, against the Cook County Sheriff in April 2013, asking the court to order the Sheriff's Department to carry out its legal duties under federal law, which requires, you know, they comply with these detainers, or at least report to the feds when they've got someone they need or want. Chavez had been charged with a felony aggravated driving, but was released. And despite that, unfortunately, the case was dismissed by the circuit court, and afterwards, the Illinois Supreme Court didn't want to hear the case. So this is a big deal. I mean, even if Biden had done what Trump had wanted, which is to have a wall, I'd want it 100 feet high, it wouldn't work if, and I don't think much in the way of any border security will work, as long as once you got across the border, you were free and clear, thanks to sanctuary policies like Cook County. So, we've got this invasion caused by the Biden administration's contemptuous open border policies, meaning contemptuous for the Constitution and our sovereignty and the rule of law. But on top of that, once these illegal aliens are here in the United States, they're aided and abetted by these sanctuary policies and protected from the consequences of additional illegal acts by these local politicians who don't care about the safety of citizens, aliens, both legal and illegal. Because obviously these folks victimize many others beyond just U.S. citizens in their communities. We have an immigration crisis caused in part, obviously, by the border. That's a big part of it. But another big part of it is the sanctuary policies that are endemic in virtually every major big city in the United States that aid and abet and coddle and protect illegal aliens, including criminals, and in this case, a deadly criminal. And so Judicial Watch has been, over the years, pushing hard, pushing back, educating the American people about the dangers of these sanctuary policies. They're not only lawless, but they're deadly. And we're honored to be able to help Brian McCann And we're honored to try to get justice for Denny McCann, who was just crossing the street. And he was killed by a drunk driver. And rather than the law being enforced, the leftists in Chicago, to make a political point, let his killer out. And it's now taken 10 years to even begin to get justice, thanks to that lawlessness that has harmed the public safety and so damaged this murder, this killing, I call it murder, this murder victim's family. And so we're happy to do the work. Of course, we only do it with your support. You know, we've got this crisis with the targeting and the effort to jail Trump. We've got election security issues. We've got the border crisis. Judicial Watch is on top of it all through litigation, education. I mean, I tell you what, the Biden administration would like nothing more than to shut down this video, for instance. I mean, you don't understand how impactful just our talking about these issues are in terms of alerting Americans to the desperate straits our country's often in. So we're proud to do the work, and we do it with your support. I encourage you to support Judicial Watch by going to judicialwatch.org, judicialwatch.org, and of course we're all over the internet on all the social media platforms. It's another great way to support us. Get the word out about what we do. That really drives the bad guys crazy. So with that, I'll see you here next week on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.